Why was the commander smiling like that, as if the ceremony were theater and she, its unworthy cast member? The hall smelled faintly of polished brass and old pride. Flags lined the walls, medals glinted beneath hard light, and the town's most decorated officers filled the front rows, each wearing expressions halfway between admiration and judgment. Commander Graham Wolfe stood center stage, his posture too perfect, his uniform too immaculate, a man rehearsed in superiority. He cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice steady as steel, "tonight we honor excellence." Then his gaze shifted to her, the female SEAL candidate standing alone before him, hands steady at her sides, jaw tight. A hush rolled across the audience. Wolfe paused deliberately. "And yet," he added, "excellence must be proven." A ripple of unease spread through the room. It was supposed to be a ceremony, not a trial, but Wolfe's tone turned it into both. For several heartbeats, no one moved, until the sound of boots echoed from the back of the hall, measured, confident, almost haunting. A woman stepped through the aisle, her shadow stretching long beneath the overhead lights. The commander's smile faltered, his words caught mid-breath. When she reached the stage, the air seemed to thicken around them. Two words fell from her lips, low but sharp enough to slice through the silence. "Iron Phoenix." And the great commander Graham Wolfe, the man who'd built a career on control, collapsed. His knees hit the floor, metals clinking as the ceremonial plaque crashed beside him. Gasps rippled through the audience. No one understood. No one but her. The woman he'd left to die 7 years ago in the deserts of Afghanistan had come home. 3 weeks earlier, Crescent Bay, Oregon. The ocean swallowed the morning fog, thick and ghostly, mooting the world into silence. Tessa Monroe stood alone on the weathered dock, sleeves rolled, hands black with engine grease. The rhythmic click of her wrench echoed across the marina like the beat of a heart she'd almost forgotten she had. Each turn of the bolt was deliberate, efficient, the kind of focus that leaves no room for thought. She had learned long ago that silence wasn't peace, it was camouflage. "You're here early again," called a voice from the harbor office. Warren Blake, retired Master Chief, keeper of this marina and the few surviving pieces of her sanity. He emerged with 2 steaming mugs of coffee, his weathered face lined with years of service and quiet empathy. Tessa didn't look up. "Halibut season," she muttered. "Martinez wants his boat running by 6. Fish don't wait for broken engines." Warren chuckled softly, but his eyes read her the way old soldiers read the sky, always searching for signs of an incoming storm. "You didn't sleep again." It wasn't a question. Tessa took the mug, fingers brushing the warm ceramic, eyes still fixed on the horizon. "Dreams," she said, just that word, nothing more. Warren nodded. He'd learned not to push. He was the one who'd found her 7 years ago, half dead on this same dock, infected wounds, no ID, and a stare that looked through walls. The Navy had listed her as KIA in Kandahar province. Only 3 people in Crescent Bay knew she was. Warren was one of them. He leaned against a crate, sipping his coffee. Navy's setting up a training facility, special warfare unit, temporary installation just outside town. Tessa froze, wrench mid-turn. "How many?" she asked. 20 operators, full support staff, commander-led. They'll use the old Coast Guard station for 30 days. A long silence. The wrench slipped in her hand, barking her knuckles. Blood mingled with grease. She didn't react. "When do they arrive?" "Already here. Official welcome tonight." He hesitated, watching her jaw tighten. "You don't have to go, Tessa." But she would, they both knew it. In a town this small, silence was a tension, avoidance was a signal. And she had survived 7 years by being neither seen nor remembered. She finished the repair in silence. By noon the fog had lifted, revealing a sky too blue to trust. Inside her workshop, her sanctuary, everything was in order. Tools hung on pegboards, cot made with military precision, a single photograph on a shelf, her in dress uniform, flanked by her parents. Her father had died believing his daughter was buried in Afghan sand. Her mother never asked for the truth. A shout broke her trance. Tessa! Aaron Mitchell, 16, lanky, all elbows and anger, came running down the dock, blood streaming from his nose. "What happened?" she demanded. "Fight," he muttered. "Danny said my dad died for nothing." Tessa's chest tightened. Aaron's father, Sergeant David Mitchell, had died in Kandahar, the same province where she'd died. She guided him inside, patching him up with quiet efficiency. The boy's tough facade cracked. "He said Afghanistan was a waste," Aaron whispered. "Said everyone who went there was stupid." Tessa cleaned the cut on his cheek. Her voice softened, steady but heavy. "Your father believed in protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. That's never a waste." He looked up, eyes raw. "Did you serve?" She hesitated, then lied gently. "Long time ago, different life." "My mom says you've got PTSD." Tessa managed a faint smile. "Your mom's perceptive." She taped the bandage. "Now go apologize to Danny. You're better than your anger." He groaned but obeyed. That was their silent agreement. She patched him up. He listened mostly. When he left, the sound of engines broke the quiet. Not trucks, military Humvees. The kind of sound her body remembered before her mind did. Her muscles tensed, instincts sparking like a live wire. From her workshop window she saw them arrive, 4 men in naval uniforms, 3 young, confident, alert, and 1 older. The way he moved, the effortless authority, her pulse faltered. Commander Graham Wolfe. The ghost of her failure, or maybe the architect of it. He hadn't changed much. A little gray at the temples, the same cold posture disguised as composure. His voice carried across the dock, calm, efficient, evaluating. "This location's perfect. Deep water, limited civilian interference." Tessa's throat constricted. She watched as he shook Warren's hand, surveying the marina as if cataloging property. His gaze swept across the workshop. For one heart-stopping moment, it lingered on her window. She didn't move. Motion draws the eye, stillness survives. And just like that, his eyes slid past her, finding nothing more than a shadow behind glass. When the vehicles left, her body still buzzed with adrenaline. Her hands shook. Her breath came shallow. Warren's voice came softly from the door. "It's him, isn't it?" She nodded, barely a whisper. "Graham Wolfe, the commander who left me behind." Warren sighed heavily. "What do you want to do?" The question landed harder than she expected. What did she want? After 7 years of not wanting anything, just existing, fixing engines, avoiding mirrors, want suddenly felt dangerous. "I don't know," she said. "Then don't hide," Warren told her gently. "You've earned your peace. Don't let him take it from you." That night, the community center glowed like a lantern in the dark. Voices and laughter spilled into the street. Tessa stood at the doorway, heart hammering like she was walking into enemy territory. Inside, uniforms blended with small-town smiles. She scanned the crowd, the respectful young lieutenant she'd seen earlier talking with Father Raphael, a priest with soldier's posture, and at the center, Wolfe. Telling stories, commanding laughter, a man who could charm even the ghosts he made. Tessa kept her distance. Vera Mitchell, the diner owner and Aaron's mother, offered her a drink. "Didn't think I'd see you here," Vera said kindly. "Seemed rude not to," Tessa murmured. Vera smiled. "Aaron told me what you said to him. Thank you. You got through to him in ways I can't." Before Tessa could reply, a SEAL approached. Mid-30s, easy grin, eyes that looked more at than into. His name tag read Rutherford. "You don't look like a mechanic," he said, offering a too-firm handshake. Tessa met his gaze evenly. "What do mechanics look like?" He smirked. "Not like you." Warren appeared beside her, voice dry. She handles all marina repairs. You'll go through proper channels if you need work done. Rutherford's grin tightened. Of course, Master Chief. He left, ego bruised but still intact. Tessa watched him rejoin Wolf's circle. The commander's laugh cut through the noise, familiar, precise, hollow. 7 years ago, that laugh had echoed in her radio right, before he called the extraction that didn't include her coordinates. Now here he was, alive, decorated, adored. And she invisible. She almost turned to leave when another voice spoke, quieter, kinder. You look like you're planning a murder. Tessa turned, the young Lieutenant Ortega. Just tired, she said. He smiled politely. You're the mechanic Master Chief mentioned, Javier Ortega. Tessa Monroe. She extended her hand before realizing too late the risk of using her real name, but he didn't flinch. To him, it was just another civilian introduction. You do good work, Ortega said. We'll probably need it. Commander Wolf runs a demanding program. What's he like? Tessa asked, tone casual but loaded. Demanding, Ortega replied carefully. Expects perfection, accepts nothing less, but fair mostly. She studied his face, and if you don't meet his standards, then you probably shouldn't be here, he said simply. Wolf's laugh rose again in the background, confident, magnetic, merciless. Tessa felt her pulse in her throat. Do you like serving under him? She asked softly. Ortega hesitated. He's my commanding officer. Diplomatic, careful, like someone already walking a moral tightrope. She respected him for it. By 10, the crowd thinned. Tessa slipped toward the exit and collided with someone at the door. A reflex sharp as ever stopped her from spilling the wine. She looked up. Graham Wolf. 2 feet between them. His eyes gold flecks, same as she remembered, his voice unchanged. Excuse me, he said politely, stepping aside. Of course, she replied. He didn't recognize her. 7 years and she could stand inches away, her heart pounding with rage and grief, and he saw nothing. When she finally reached her apartment above the marina, she didn't turn on the light. Through the window, the ocean stretched dark and endless. Her reflection looked back, a face thinner, scarred, half forgotten. 7 years ago, she'd wanted to vanish. Tonight, she wanted to be seen. Warren's question echoed again. What do you want to do? She didn't know, not yet. But deep down, the answer had already started to form. Quiet, sharp, inevitable. This time, she wouldn't run. Not from him. Not from herself. Because ghosts can hide only so long before they start haunting back. Why was she running again? The ground beneath her boots was burning, the air too thick to breathe. The radio crackled with static, and over it his voice, calm, final. Position compromised, extraction aborted. Good luck, Monroe. Tessa jerked awake, tangled in sweat-soaked sheets. Her chest heaved as if she'd sprinted miles. For a moment she didn't know where she was. The walls were too close, the silence too loud. Then the faint cry of gulls outside pulled her back to Crescent Bay. She sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on her knees, hands pressed over her face. The nightmare had been almost gentle this time. No blood, just his voice. She showered until the water went from scalding to cold, scrubbing away the phantom dust of Kandahar. By the time she dressed, dawn had turned the harbor silver. Out on the water, boats rocked gently in their slips, ordinary people chasing ordinary mornings. She envied them, the luxury of normal worry, fuel prices, fishing quotas, weather forecasts, problems that didn't bleed when you touched them. By 7, she was already at her workbench, dismantling a carburetor that didn't need fixing. The repetition helped. Wrench, gasket, screw, control in small motions when the larger ones refused to obey. The radio on the shelf muttered through marine chatter, fishing schedules, weather advisories, static-laced laughter. She kept the volume low, needing just enough noise to drown out memory. At 8:15, Warren appeared, holding 2 coffees and an expression she didn't like. "The SEALs need equipment transport," he said. "Specialized diving gear, comms, underwater nav systems. Shipping came through us because the Coast Guard road can't take the weight." Tessa looked up, already suspicious. "Who's coordinating pickup?" "They're sending someone. Should be here in an hour." Her jaw flexed. "Wolf?" "Probably not. Maybe that young lieutenant, Javier Ortega." Warren hesitated, watching her face. "Thought you'd want a heads up." "Appreciated," she said, though her pulse had already shifted into quiet alertness. She tried to work, but her focus drifted. Her mind ran calculations. Hide, that would look suspicious. Stay, that would be worse if she froze. When the transport truck finally rolled in, gray paint, navy markings, she was ready, or as ready as she could be. She stood outside the workshop, wiping her hands on a rag, the casual posture of someone with nothing to hide. 2 people climbed out. Ortega, clean-cut, precise, and a young woman in fatigues who moved like she was being graded on every step. Her name tag read Caldwell. "Morning," Warren greeted, ever the diplomat. "Tessa, this is Lieutenant Ortega and Petty Officer Piper Caldwell. They'll handle the transfer." Ortega smiled in recognition. "Good to see you again, Miss Monroe." "Likewise," she said. Caldwell's glance flicked over her, professional and quick. Civilian clothes, grease-stained hands, confident posture. The girl cataloged everything. Tessa recognized the behavior instantly. She'd done the same for years, scanning environments for threats. The lieutenant and Warren walked off to check docking logistics, leaving Caldwell by the boats. The young woman studied each hull like a student memorizing answers. "You dive?" Tessa asked, stepping beside her. Caldwell startled, then composed herself. "Yes, ma'am. Operational requirement." "You like it?" The girl hesitated. "It's part of the job." Then she winced. "Sorry, I shouldn't discuss ops with civilians." Tessa smiled faintly. "It's not exactly classified that SEALs dive." Caldwell exhaled, almost laughing. "Fair point. I just forget where the line is sometimes." Tessa nodded. She remembered that tension, the constant balance between confidence and caution. "Boats here are different from your tactical craft," she said. "Heavier, slower, built for weather, not stealth." The girl looked at her sharply, surprised by the technical fluency. "You know your way around them." "I should," Tessa said. "It's my job." Caldwell's posture softened just slightly. "These are beautiful. You can tell whoever maintains them knows what they're doing." Flattery noted. The silence that followed was surprisingly comfortable until the girl spoke again, voice lower. "I'm the only woman in the unit," she admitted. "Every mistake I make feels like proof they were right to doubt me." Tessa stilled. The air around them seemed to cool. "Who they?" Caldwell looked toward the water. "Everyone. Commander Wolf especially. He's watching for me to fail, and I can't give him that satisfaction." Something deep in Tessa's chest twisted. The words could have been her own 7 years earlier. "What you're describing isn't training," she said quietly. "That's hazing wrapped in standards talk." Caldwell blinked. "You sound like you've seen it before." Tessa wiped her hands on the rag. "Different place, same game. Don't let his doubt become your voice. You qualified to be here. That's already the proof." A shout from the pier broke their conversation. "Caldwell, barge inbound." The young woman straightened instantly. "Thank you," she said, and jogged off. The barge arrived heavy with waterproof containers. Tessa drove the forklift while Ortega and Caldwell checked serials. Their teamwork was crisp, call-and-response rhythm, practiced coordination, until suddenly it was. "Lieutenant," Caldwell called, "we have a discrepancy." Tessa looked up. Ortega was frowning at his tablet. "You sure?" "Positive. Manifest says Delta. This unit's Gamma." He muttered a curse. "Gamma won't hold frequency in saltwater. Damn it." He pulled out his phone to report the issue. Tessa's hands moved before her brain could stop them. She crouched beside the container, scanning the serial number, running her fingers over the comms unit housing. "Gamma's for freshwater," she murmured. "You could reconfigure it, but it takes the right tools. 4 hours minimum." Both SEALs stared at her. "How do you know that?" Caldwell asked. Tessa froze. The wrong kind of knowledge had just slipped free. She forced a shrug. "Worked with commercial diving systems before boats. Same idea." Ortega didn't fully buy it, but he let it go. "Either way, this sets us back 3 days. "Not if we source replacements," Tessa said before she could stop herself. "Naval Supply Depot in Portland usually stocks Delta units." 2 hours north," Ortega said. "We'd need authorization." "And someone who knows what we're looking for," Caldwell added. Warren, who'd been listening quietly, cleared his throat. "Take Tessa. She knows the suppliers up there. You'll save time." Tessa shot him a look that could cut metal, but declining would draw questions. "I can help," she said finally. "No need for compensation." 30 minutes later, she was in the passenger seat of a Navy transport heading up Highway 101, ocean flashing silver on their left. Ortega drove. Caldwell sat in the back, eyes fixed on her tablet. The hum of the engine filled the silence. Ortega broke it first. "You've been in Crescent Bay long." 7 years. He glanced sideways, came back after. "Some time away," she said. "Military time?" he asked gently. Tessa's lips curved, something like that. He nodded, letting the answer hang. "I started in surface warfare myself, got picked up for SEAL training late. Commander Wolf was my instructor." Her fingers tightened on her knee. "What was that like?" He thought for a long moment. "Brutal, but he made me finish. I almost quit in Hell Week. He told me comfort was a choice. I stayed." "And you respect him for it?" Ortega hesitated. "I respect the outcome, not sure about the method." From the back seat, Caldwell spoke softly. "He doesn't treat everyone the same." Ortega's tone was cautious. "He's harder on you, I've noticed." "Because I'm female," she said flatly. "He said integration's a political stunt, told the other officers." Tessa stared out the window, jaw tightening. "Has he crossed any lines?" she asked. Caldwell shook her head. "Nothing provable, extra scrutiny, constant doubt, death by 1,000 cuts." "That's how it starts," Tessa said, voice low. "Paper cuts that bleed only when you count them all." Ortega looked at her, curious. "You sound like someone who's been there." "Maybe I have." They drove in silence until the depot gates appeared. Barbed wire, chain-link fences, the smell of machine oil and salt. Ortega flashed credentials. Inside, the world shrank into warehouses and echoing metal. A supply chief processed their request. "We have 3 Deltas in stock," he said, "but there's a flag on this authorization. Need to confirm with naval intelligence." Ortega frowned. "That's new." The chief stepped away to make a call. Caldwell's shoulders went rigid. "Lieutenant, intel oversight isn't normal, is it?" "Not for training equipment," Ortega said. When the chief returned, his face was unreadable. "Captain Lydia Hartman, Naval Intelligence, will contact you. Routine audit." Tessa's pulse skipped. Intelligence oversight never meant routine. They loaded the comms units in silence. On the drive back, Ortega's phone buzzed. He showed the screen, "Meet tonight, off-site. Captain Hartman, topic, Commander Wolf." "That's not routine," Caldwell said quietly. Tessa said nothing, but her thoughts raced. If intelligence was digging into Wolf, there was a reason. Maybe finally, after 7 years, the truth was stirring. When they returned to Crescent Bay, the sky was bleeding orange over the water. Warren waited at the dock, reading their faces before they spoke. "Complications?" he asked. "Naval Intelligence," Ortega replied. Warren's brows lifted. "Interesting." After they left, Tessa followed him into his office. He closed the door. "That Hartman woman came by while you were gone," he said. Didn't give her name, but she asked questions about you. Tessa's stomach tightened. What kind of questions? How long you've worked here, where you came from, whether you've had Navy connections. He slid a business card across the desk. Captain L. Hartman, Naval Intelligence. Nothing else. She left that, Warren said. Said you could call if you ever wanted to talk. Tessa turned the card over in her hand. It felt heavier than it should. What do you think she wants? Warren studied her. Same thing you do, answers about Kandahar. The name landed like a blow. She hadn't spoken it aloud in years. Outside, the marina lights flickered on. Somewhere down the street, laughter rose from the diner. The world kept spinning, pretending not to notice ghosts climbing back into it. Tessa slipped the card into her pocket. If I call her, everything changes, she said. No more hiding. You stopped hiding the moment Wolf showed up, Warren said quietly. Question is, do you tell the story or let him keep writing it for you? That night fog rolled back in from the sea. Tessa walked home through it, the card heavy against her thigh. She didn't see the text until she reached her door. Aaron's in trouble, police station, need help, Vera. She grabbed her jacket and ran. The station's fluorescent lights buzzed like angry flies. Vera paced the waiting area, apron still tied, eyes red. They arrested him, she said, for vandalism. What did he do? Spray-painted the veterans' memorial, tried to add names, soldiers who died in unacknowledged ops. Tessa's breath caught. Her own name was missing from that monument, buried in classified ink. He said it's wrong to forget them, Vera whispered, that it's justice. The door opened. Two boys walked out, Aaron and his friend Danny, paint still on their hands. Behind them came a priest, calm but commanding. Father Raphael, Vera said, relieved. The priest nodded to the officer. I've arranged community service instead of charges. They'll clean the memorial, assist the VFW. Aaron's jaw was set. We weren't vandalizing, we were honoring them. Tessa stepped closer. Justice without law is still chaos, Aaron. You honor by how you live, not just by what you write. He glared. You served. You know what it's like to be forgotten. The words hit too close. Vera's eyes widened, realizing her son had guessed what Tessa never admitted. Father Raphael watched quietly, reading faces like scripture. When they left, he followed Tessa outside. He said you served, he began. He respects you. I don't talk about it, she said. Most veterans don't, the priest replied. But when you flinched at the word forgotten, that wasn't theory, that was memory. Tessa stopped walking. You were military, she said. He smiled faintly. Army, Rangers, then Chaplain Corps, 15 years. They stood in the cool night, two soldiers in borrowed lives. Whatever brought you back here, Father Raphael said gently, you don't have to carry it alone. Back in her apartment, the harbor was a blur of lights through fog. Two cards lay on the table, one from a priest, one from Naval Intelligence. Two paths, confession or confrontation. She traced her finger over the simpler one first. Father Raphael, no rank, no agenda. Then the other, Captain L. Hartman, Naval Intelligence. Mercy or truth? Forgiveness or justice? Both would cost her something she could never replace. Outside, the sea pressed against the docks, whispering in the language only the lost remember. And somewhere in that darkness, she knew, this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about being seen. Because the hardest part of coming back from the dead isn't proving you lived. It's deciding why. Why was he calling for her by name when he wasn't supposed to know it? Tessa froze in the doorway of her workshop. Morning light spilled through the open bay, cutting stripes across the floor. Outside, the wind carried the smell of salt and diesel. Commander Graham Wolfe stood beside the pier, clipboard in hand, surrounded by young operators who looked at him like he'd carved the ocean himself. Her first instinct was to disappear, step back, blend into the background, but it was too late. His gaze had already found her. "Miss Monroe," he called, voice calm, polite, authoritative. "I'm told you're the local expert on these vessels." She swallowed hard, forcing her heartbeat into rhythm. "I maintain them, yes." Wolf gestured toward a patrol craft moored at the dock. "We're running an exercise off Blackstone Cliffs. Currents are unpredictable, and I need a civilian pilot familiar with this coastline. Your name came up." Tessa's throat tightened. He didn't recognize her voice, her face, the way she carried herself, but he just handed her the key to proximity, the very thing she'd feared and maybe needed. Warren stepped forward quickly. "Commander, she's not Navy certified anymore." Wolf's eyes cut to him, cool and dismissive. "I'm not asking for combat clearance, Master Chief, just a steady hand on the wheel." Then to her, "Can you do it?" The question wasn't a question. It was a test. The same tone he'd used years ago, standing in desert heat while she bled beneath sandbags, waiting for extraction that never came. "I can handle it," she said evenly. Wolf nodded once. "Good, briefing at 800, you'll ride with us." As he walked away, Ortega shot her an apologetic look. "I didn't know he'd pick you," he said quietly. "Neither did I," she replied. Inside, Warren's expression was dark with warning. "You sure about this?" "No," she said, "but if I keep hiding, he wins twice." Yeah. By the time the SEAL unit gathered at the dock, the morning fog had begun to lift. The team loaded gear, waterproof crates, sonar buoys, sealed comms packs. Ortega ran logistics, Caldwell checked weapons, and Wolf watched it all with the detached intensity of a man who saw people as moving parts of a larger machine. Tessa boarded last. Her hands brushed the cool metal railing, and for a moment she was back in the Gulf of Oman, different boat, same hum of tension. The smell of oil and salt water always brought the ghosts closer. Wolf stood near the helm, scanning a map. "Currents are strong today," he said. "We'll test endurance, coordination, and trust." His eyes flicked briefly toward her. "All of which are optional until they're not." The team chuckled softly, more out of habit than humor. Tessa moved to the controls, fingers familiar on the throttle. The engine roared to life, smooth and obedient. She eased them out into open water, the cliffs rising ahead like jagged teeth biting at the horizon. Wolf watched her in silence for the first few miles. Finally, he spoke. "You've got a steady hand, Miss Monroe." "I've had practice," she said without looking at him. "Where'd you learn?" "Here and there." He smiled faintly. "Vague answer, you ex-military." Her pulse skipped, but she kept her tone calm. "Everyone here's ex-something, Commander." He studied her profile, as if trying to peel back layers of memory. "You remind me of someone I knew once. She had that same stubborn posture." She almost laughed. "Sounds like trouble." "She was," he said softly, then turned away. The silence that followed wasn't comfortable, but it was alive. Yeah. Blackstone cliffs loomed ahead, towering walls of basalt and foam. Waves crashed against the rocks, white spray exploding upward like shattered glass. Tessa eased back the throttle. "This is as close as you'll get without losing hull integrity," she said. Wolf nodded. "Anchors down, Team Bravo deploy." The SEALs moved like clockwork. Caldwell led the dive team. Ortega managed comms. Tessa watched through the reflection on the instrument glass as Caldwell checked her oxygen feed, her hands steady despite the rough surf. Wolf's voice came through the radio. "Dive teams 1 and 2 report depth every 5 minutes. Surface team maintain visual." For a few minutes everything was mechanical, predictable, controlled. Then the radio crackled. "Commander, currents shifting east. We're losing signal from buoy 2. Caldwell's voice sharp, professional, a hint of worry beneath. "Copy," Wolf said. "Recalibrate and continue." But Tessa saw something on the sonar, a ripple that didn't match wave rhythm. Too slow for current, too large for debris. She frowned. "Commander," she said carefully, You've got an undertow forming near the southern ridge. If they drift too far, they'll get pulled into it. Wolf checked his tablet. My data shows stable current. Your data's 2 minutes old, she replied. You'll lose them before you get an update. For a second, she thought he'd dismiss her. Then he looked at her, really looked, and something in her voice must have triggered the part of him that still respected instinct over protocol. Caldwell, he called. Shift north by 30 degrees. Follow Monroe's coordinates. Copy. Minutes stretched into silence, broken only by wind and machinery. Then Caldwell's voice returned. Sir, current neutralized, found the buoy, delta stable. Wolf exhaled quietly. Relief disguised as composure, he turned to her. Good call. Experience, she said simply. He studied her. Where'd you get that experience, Miss Monroe? She almost told him then. Almost said, you left me in it, but she held the words. The truth would mean nothing without proof, and she wasn't here for vengeance. Not yet. Yeah. When the teams resurfaced, Caldwell climbed aboard last, exhausted but alive. Wolf clapped her on the shoulder. Good work. The young woman nodded, trying not to show pride. But her eyes flicked toward Tessa, gratitude hidden under fatigue. As they headed back to port, Wolf stood beside the helm again. You've got instincts, Monroe, he said quietly. The kind you don't learn fixing boats. She kept her eyes on the horizon. Maybe I learned the hard way. He nodded. The hard way's usually the one that lasts. They reached the marina by noon. Ortega and the others unloaded gear. Wolf lingered, hands behind his back. We'll be running another op tomorrow, he said. I'd like you on board again. Depends on the tide, she said. He smiled faintly. Something tells me you don't wait for permission from the tide. She said nothing, but his words stayed with her long after he walked away. Yeah. Later that evening, she sat outside her apartment watching the sea. The horizon burned orange, bleeding into blue. The world was quiet in a way that never used to be safe. Warren joined her, setting down 2 mugs of tea. So, he said, how was playing ghost among the living? He didn't recognize me, she said. Not yet, Warren replied, but you shook him, I could see it. She stared into her cup. He looked right at me and said I reminded him of someone. That's the thing about guilt, Warren said softly. It forgets faces but never voices. Keep talking to him long enough, he'll remember. Tessa's hands tightened around the mug. And then what? You think I want revenge? I think you want truth, he said, and maybe to hear him say it out loud. Yeah. Later that night, the storm came without warning. Sheets of rain hammered the roof, thunder rolling like artillery. Tessa lay awake, watching lightning flash across the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come, so she dressed and walked to the docks. The rain felt cleansing, real. She stood at the edge, hair soaked, breathing the salt into her lungs. From across the marina, a flashlight beam cut through the rain. Ortega's voice called, "You're out here too." She turned. He approached, drenched, holding an umbrella that did nothing against the wind. "Couldn't sleep," he said. "These storms always hit before dawn. Wolf says it keeps the team sharp." "Or paranoid," she said. He laughed softly, "Maybe both." They stood under the awning, listening to the rain beat down. "You ever lose someone out there?" Ortega asked quietly. Her jaw tensed. "Everyone loses someone out there." He nodded. "Wolf did too, Kandahar. He never talks about it, but I heard whispers. Something went wrong. Whole team compromised. 1 KIA, 2 missing." She turned slowly. "What was the operative's name?" He frowned, searching memory. "Monroe, I think. Tessa Monroe, you knew her." She stared into the rain. "No," she said softly, "but I've heard of her." Ortega didn't catch the lie. He looked out toward the sea. Wolf carried her file for years, never said why, just carried it. When he left, the rain eased into mist. Tessa stood alone, heartbeat echoing in the quiet. So he had remembered her name, even if not her face. Somewhere deep inside, anger softened into something more complicated. Not forgiveness, never that, but understanding, the kind that hurt more than hate. She returned to her apartment and opened the drawer she hadn't touched in years. Inside lay a dog tag, tarnished and cold. Monroe Tessa L. Opos USN. She closed her fist around it until the edges bit into her skin. Then she took out the card from Naval Intelligence. Captain Hartman's number stared up at her. Her thumb hovered over her phone screen. Call or don't, truth or silence. When she finally pressed dial, the line rang twice before a calm voice answered. Hartman. This is Tessa Monroe, she said quietly. You've been looking for me. A pause, then. We thought you were dead. I was, Tessa said, but the man who buried me isn't finished yet. Yeah. At dawn, she met Captain Lydia Hartman in a coffee shop off the pier. Civilian clothes, hair tied back, eyes like tempered steel. You've been off-grid 7 years, Hartman said. Why now? Because Commander Wolf is here, Tessa said. Hartman's expression didn't change. We know, that's why I'm here too. Intel oversight. Hartman nodded. Unofficially, there's suspicion he falsified an after-action report. Operation Nightglass, Kandahar. Tessa's breath caught. That's the mission. We've been trying to verify what happened, Hartman said. Records say you were KIA. No remains recovered. Wolf's testimony sealed the file. Tessa's voice shook. He left me, he called extraction early, said it was too hot, but I made it out. Then you can prove it. Hartman slid a photo across the table. Caldwell in training gear. You've seen this woman. Yes. She's next. Wolf's repeating the same pattern, isolating her, pushing limits, breaking boundaries. We need evidence before someone else disappears. Tessa looked at the image. Caldwell's eyes, defiant, uncertain, mirrored her own from another lifetime. What do you want me to do? She asked. Hartman's answer was quiet. Stay close. Watch, record everything. When the time comes, I'll bring the rest. Tessa hesitated. And if he recognizes me? Hartman's expression softened. Then maybe it's time he finally does. Yeah. That night back at the marina, Tessa stood watching the ocean swallow the last of the sun. The horizon was quiet again, deceptively calm. Warren found her there. Big decision, he asked. Big enough, she said. I told intelligence everything. He nodded. Then the tide's turning. She looked out over the water, the cliffs dark against the fading light. Somewhere out there she'd almost died. Now she was going back, not for vengeance, but for the truth she refused to stay buried. Because some ghosts don't haunt to punish. They haunt to remind the living what they chose to forget. Why was the sea so calm when every instinct screamed it shouldn't be? Tessa stood at the edge of the dock, the morning fog curling like smoke around her boots. The horizon looked harmless, too still, too quiet. That kind of silence never lasted. Not here, not with him. Across the pier, Commander Wolf barked orders with his usual precision. The team prepped the rib boats, loading comms units, rifles, sonar buoys. Caldwell checked her diving gear twice, lips moving in silent count. Ortega looked distracted, eyes darting toward the gray line of sea like he could already feel trouble forming beyond it. Tessa pulled her jacket tighter against the wind. Every sound was sharper today. The slap of rope, the clatter of metal, the low hum of engines. Her body remembered this rhythm, the ritual before chaos. Wolf approached her, clipboard in hand. You're with us again, Miss Monroe. Same drill. Blackstone perimeter run, 15 nautical miles, return by 1400. She met his eyes, steady. Forecast says rising squalls by noon. He glanced at the clear horizon. I don't train my men around weather reports. Then maybe train them around survival, she said before she could stop herself. For a fraction of a second, something flickered behind his expression, recognition, irritation, or memory. Then it was gone. You worry too much, he said, turning away. She almost smiled. You said that once before. Yeah. By 900, the convoy left the harbor. 2 patrol boats, 1 support craft. Tessa took helm on the lead vessel, Wolf at her side. Ortega and Caldwell were aboard too, along with 3 others she barely knew, men whose confidence came from youth and ignorance. The cliffs rose fast, black stone cutting the sky like blades. The water darkened, heavy with current. Wolf studied his map. We'll simulate covert insertion at marker 7. Caldwell leads the dive. Ortega manages comms. Surface team maintains perimeter. Tessa kept her gaze on the radar, currents shifting north. Noted, Wolf said without looking. But he didn't note it. Not really. She could tell from his stance, the way he leaned into command as though authority could bend physics. 15 minutes later, the wind turned. The waves began to thicken. Tessa's hands tightened on the throttle. "Commander, we're losing stability. You need to call off the dive." "Negative," Wolf replied. "They need to adapt to unpredictability." She turned sharply. "That's not unpredictability, that's a rip current forming under the southern ridge." "Your caution's admirable," he said coolly, "but unnecessary." Her jaw locked. "If you send them down now, you'll lose them." The silence that followed was colder than the sea. Then, slowly, Wolf looked at her. "You seem very confident in your analysis, Miss Monroe." Her voice stayed calm, though her pulse roared in her ears. "I've seen this before. Same terrain, same current shift. It took 3 divers before we realized the pattern." His eyes narrowed. "Where?" She hesitated too long. He caught it. Something in his gaze sharpened. "Deploy," he ordered into the radio. "Caldwell dive. Maintain comms channel." The team moved fast, obeying training over instinct. Caldwell and 2 others slipped into the dark water, fins flashing once before vanishing beneath the waves. Tessa felt the first pull of the current through the hull, a slow drag, like something invisible tightening its grip. She adjusted position, reading the sonar. Then the screen glitched, a white spike noise. "Commander," Ortega called. "Signal degradation, losing Caldwell's feed." Wolf frowned. "Recalibrate." "Already did." "Then check the transmitters." But Tessa had already seen it on sonar, the telltale arc of displacement, the undertow forming near the ridge. Her stomach turned cold. "She's off course," she said. "The current's dragging her east." Wolf shook his head. "That's impossible, she's tethered." "Not anymore," Tessa said quietly. "Tether snapped 30 seconds ago." Ortega's voice cracked through the static. "Caldwell, respond." "Nothing." The radio hissed. Then panic. "Commander, I can't, visibility 0, currents pulling." The voice cut off in a rush of bubbles. Tessa was already moving. She shoved past Wolf, grabbed the emergency dive kit, and started strapping in. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded. "Saving your operator." "You're not authorized." "Neither was she when you sent her down there." Their eyes locked. Something in hers, familiar, defiant, burning, froze him mid-sentence. Before he could speak, she dove. Yeah. The ocean swallowed her whole. Cold hit like a punch to the ribs. She kicked hard, light slicing through murk. The current yanked her sideways, but she fought it, remembering the map burned into her memory. 30 feet down, she saw a flicker, movement, then a glint of metal. Caldwell tumbling, her tether trailing uselessly, oxygen nearly gone. Tessa reached her, wrapped an arm around her chest, and jammed her emergency regulator into the girl's mouth. Caldwell's eyes flew open, shock, then relief. Tessa pointed upward. "Go." They kicked together, lungs burning, legs screaming against the current. Twice it dragged them sideways, but Tessa angled them toward a rock outcrop. She slammed her shoulder into stone, pain flaring sharp, but it gave them leverage to push upward. They broke the surface in a blast of air and foam. Caldwell gasped, coughing seawater. The boat was 50 meters away. Ortega shouted, throwing a line. Tessa held Caldwell's vest with one hand, reaching for the rope with the other. Waves crashed, pulling them apart. She used her body as anchor, shoving the girl toward safety first. Strong arms caught Caldwell. Then the rope came again, this time for her. She grabbed it, muscles screaming, and let them pull her in. By the time she hit the deck, her lungs felt carved out. Wolf stood over her, rain beginning to fall, face unreadable. "You disobeyed orders," he said. She coughed, spitting seawater. "She'd be dead if I didn't." "That wasn't your call." She met his eyes. It was the right one. Ortega knelt beside Caldwell, checking vitals. "She's stable." The commander turned to the crew. "Pack it up, we're heading back." No one spoke on the return. The only sound was the thrum of the engine and the rain hammering the deck. Back at the marina, medics took Caldwell away. Wolf dismissed the team, then turned to Tessa. "Walk with me." She followed him along the pier. The storm had grown fierce, waves slamming against the pilings. He stopped near the end, staring into the horizon. "You think you saved her," he said quietly, "but you undermined command. She's alive. That's the only measure that matters." He looked at her, expression unreadable. "You talk like someone who's lost people." "Everyone has." "No," he said, "not like that." He stepped closer, eyes narrowing as lightning flashed between them. "Who are you really?" Her pulse thundered. The rain plastered her hair to her face. She could have lied again, could have walked away, but something in her, some tired, buried part, refused to hide anymore. "You really don't know?" she asked softly. He frowned. "Should I?" 7 years ago, Kandahar, Operation Nightglass, you called the extraction." His face went pale. "That's not possible." "You said the perimeter was too hot. You left me behind." He stared at her as if looking through time. The lightning cracked again, and she saw the flicker of memory in his eyes, recognition blooming like a wound reopening. "Tessa," he breathed, "Tessa Monroe." She took a step closer. "You buried me in that desert." For a long time, neither spoke. The rain filled the silence. Finally, he said, "You weren't supposed to survive." Her laugh was raw, bitter. "You sound disappointed." "I thought you were dead," he said quietly. "If I'd known." "You'd have still left," she snapped. "Because it was easier. Because one life was less paperwork than admitting your plan failed." He didn't deny it, and somehow that hurt more than words ever could. "I had to choose," he said finally, "between saving one or saving 6. "So you chose yourself," she said, "and wrote me off." He looked down. "You don't understand what command does to a man." She shook her head. "I understand exactly what it does. It teaches you how to justify ghosts." The storm raged harder. They stood there soaked, 2 soldiers on opposite ends of a lie. Finally she spoke. "You're being investigated, naval intelligence, Captain Hartman." His eyes snapped up. "Hartman." "She's watching you. She knows about Kandahar." He stared into the rain. "Of course she does." "Then tell the truth," Tessa said. "End it before someone else pays for your silence." He turned to her, voice low. "You think it's that simple?" "Yes." "It never is." He stepped closer, close enough that the rain between them turned to steam. "You think I'm a monster. Maybe I am. But you weren't supposed to die, Tessa. You were supposed to be the one who came home." She felt something break inside, anger, grief, maybe both. "I did come home, you just didn't want to see it." The next morning, the world pretended nothing had happened. The sea was calm again, the storm gone as if it had never existed. But Wolf didn't show up for briefing. Ortega led in his place, eyes tight with confusion. "Commander, been called to the base," he said, "meeting with naval intelligence." Tessa kept her face neutral, but her pulse quickened. Hartman had moved faster than expected. After the session, Caldwell found her at the workshop. "They said you saved my life," she said softly. Tessa smiled faintly. "You saved your own, I just pointed the way." The younger woman hesitated. He's furious, said you compromised the mission. Let him be, Tessa said. Some truths only grow in silence. Caldwell nodded slowly, not fully understanding but sensing the weight behind the words. You ever regret it, the service? Tessa looked toward the sea. No, I regret who I trusted. Yeah. That evening, Tessa met Hartman again. The captain's tone was crisp, all business. You were right. Wolf's record doesn't add up. We've recovered parts of the Nightglass file, false timestamps, altered radio transcripts. Tessa exhaled, a mix of relief and dread. What happens now? We confront him tomorrow. And if he fights it? Hartman's eyes darkened. Then the Navy learns what monsters it built. Tessa nodded. I'll be there. Hartman studied her. You still care, don't you? Tessa smiled without humor. Caring is the only thing I have left. Yeah. When she left the meeting, the air smelled of rain again. She stood at the end of the dock, staring into the endless gray. In the reflection on the water, she saw two faces, one from who she was, one from who she'd become. For years she'd lived between them, dead to one world, invisible to the other. But now both demanded truth. Somewhere behind her, thunder rumbled again. The sea was never done taking. And neither, it seemed, was the past. She whispered into the wind, not sure who she was speaking to, Wolf, the ocean, or herself. You can't outrun what you survive. The waves answered with silence. And somewhere deep inside that silence, the next storm was already forming. Because truth doesn't stay buried. It rises. Like the tide. Why was she shaking, when she'd sworn she'd never tremble in front of them again? The steel corridors of the naval facility gleamed like mirrors, cold and unforgiving. Every footstep echoed, crisp, disciplined, hollow. Tessa walked behind Captain Hartman, her civilian clothes feeling out of place among the dark uniforms and rank bars. Eyes followed her as they passed, whispers, stares, silent calculations. Most saw just a woman out of context. None saw the ghost walking back into the building that had buried her. Hartman stopped outside a conference room. Frosted glass, brass handles. Inside, muted voices. Remember, Hartman said, tone even but eyes sharp. Stay calm, tell the truth, nothing more, nothing less. Tessa nodded, though her pulse was a steady drum in her throat. When they entered, Commander Graham Wolf was already there. He stood at the end of the long table, uniform flawless, jaw tight, the same posture he'd worn in every battlefield debrief. Control disguised as calm. He didn't look at her, not yet. Two officers sat opposite him, Admiral Vance and Rear Admiral Wexler, both old-school Navy. Between them, a stack of files. Captain Hartman, Vance said, and Miss Monroe. He emphasized the name like tasting something unexpected. Hartman nodded. Sir, Miss Tessa Monroe is the operative previously listed KIA under Commander Wolf's command during Operation Nightglass. Wexler adjusted his glasses. We're aware this is highly irregular. Hartman set a folder on the table. So was her death. Wolf's eyes flicked to Tessa for the first time, and for an instant his composure cracked. It was quick, but she saw it. A small fracture in the armor. Commander, Vance said, you understand why you're here? Yes, sir. Captain Hartman's investigation has uncovered inconsistencies in your after-action report. We're here to verify the facts. Vance opened the file. Operation Nightglass, Kandahar Province. Classified recon with 7 operatives under your command. 2 confirmed casualties, 1 missing, 1 declared KIA, Petty Officer Tessa Monroe. Wolf stood straight. Confirmed by lack of signal and satellite visuals. Area compromised. Extraction ordered under fire. And yet, Wexler said, Miss Monroe stands here alive. The silence after that sentence felt heavy enough to crush. Tessa kept her gaze forward. Hartman gestured slightly, her cue. She took a breath. Our team was pinned under mortar fire, sir. We had radio failure. Commander Wolf called early extraction. We were less than 300 meters from evac when the chopper lifted. Wolf's voice was low. I had to choose. We were losing men. The window was closing. You chose wrong, she said quietly. His eyes hardened. I made a command decision, based on intel at the time. Hartman slid a document across the table. Intel you wrote. Vance frowned. Explain. Hartman tapped the report. Time stamps altered. Extraction log backdated by 5 minutes. The difference between saving a soldier and abandoning one. Wolf didn't deny it. He didn't move. Just stared at the page as if it could rewrite itself if he looked long enough. Finally he said, the system glitched. Hartman leaned forward. Commander, you're too meticulous for system errors. You knew she was still alive. I couldn't risk the others, he said sharply. So you risked her instead, Hartman replied. Tessa's voice broke the tension. He didn't risk me, he erased me. The words hung in the air. No one spoke. Vance cleared his throat. Miss Monroe, what happened after the extraction? Tessa stared at her reflection in the polished table. The story was muscle memory now, scars turned into sentences. I crawled north, 2 days with no water, found by a local shepherd. He hid me from Taliban scouts, got me to a border camp. I was airlifted out by NATO under false ID. She swallowed hard. By the time I got to Germany, the Navy had already declared me dead. My file sealed, my name gone. Hartman's voice softened slightly. She spent 7 years living as a civilian under assumed identity. Wexler nodded slowly. And you never contacted command, Miss Monroe. She met his eyes. You think I didn't try? Every message disappeared into silence. Someone made sure the system forgot me. Hartman slid another document forward, a signature page. Authorization for file closure, signed by Commander Graham Wolf. Wolf didn't flinch, but his voice when it came was tired. She was gone. I saw the explosion. We lost the signal. I wasn't protecting myself, I was protecting morale. A dead name keeps faith intact. A missing one breaks it. Tessa's reply came like a knife wrapped in calm. You don't protect morale with lies. You protect it with truth. The admirals exchanged a glance. Hartman leaned back, letting the silence do the work. Wolf looked at her finally, not as a ghost, but as something worse. A reminder that the truth doesn't dissolve just because you sign it away. You think I don't carry it, he said. Every day since that mission I've replayed it. You think I sleep. I see you in the dust every night. She held his gaze. You had 7 years to say that. Yeah. The session adjourned after 2 hours. Hartman and the admirals left to compile testimony. Wolf lingered by the window, watching rain streak the glass. Tessa stood by the door, unsure whether to leave or finish what she started. Finally, she said, You're good at surviving yourself, Commander. He turned, voice quiet. You think I walked away unscarred? I think you walked away at all. He exhaled, the weight of years collapsing in one breath. You were my best operator, Tessa. You didn't hesitate, you didn't question. You would have made commander one day. She shook her head. No, I would have ended up like you, calling abandonment leadership. His mouth twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. Maybe that's why I left you, because I couldn't stand seeing what I'd become. For the first time, she didn't feel anger, just exhaustion, the kind that reaches bone. You don't get to turn betrayal into wisdom, she said quietly. You just own it. Hartman returned, folder in hand. We're done for now. Commander Wolf, you're relieved pending formal inquiry. Wolf nodded, the mask sliding back on. Understood. He looked at Tessa once more. You wanted truth, you've got it. What will you do with it? She didn't answer, because she didn't know. Yeah. Outside, the rain had stopped. The world smelled like rust and salt. Hartman walked beside her in silence until they reached the parking lot. You did well, she said. I didn't do it for well, Tessa replied. Hartman studied her. What are you going to do now? Tessa stared at the horizon. Go home, see if it still feels like one. Yeah. Crescent Bay was quiet that evening. The sea moved slow, heavy, the kind of calm that follows confession. Warren was waiting at the dock, the old dog asleep by his feet. You look like you've seen ghosts, he said. I have, she replied. Did he admit it? In his way. And did it help? She thought about it. No, but it stopped hurting. He nodded. That's something. They sat in silence, listening to the water lap against the pier. After a while she asked, Do you believe in redemption, Warren? He smiled faintly. I believe some people earn peace the long way around. And some don't. Some confuse silence for peace. She looked out at the dark water. I don't know which one I am. He sipped his tea. You came back, that's a start. Yeah. The next morning, a car arrived at the marina. Ortega stepped out, crisp uniform, expression uncertain. Permission to come aboard, he joked weakly. Tessa smiled faintly. You don't need permission. I heard what happened. Wolf suspended. She nodded. It's done. He hesitated. He wasn't all bad, you know, just lost in the system. I know, she said. That's what makes it worse. He looked at her a long time. Caldwell, transferring out. Hartman offered her a spot in advanced recon. She wanted to thank you. Tell her she already did by surviving. Ortega lingered. And you, what now? She looked at the sea. Maybe I'll fix the engines, keep the lights on, live small. He smiled. That's not who you are. She looked back at him, eyes calm but steady. Maybe it is now. Yeah. That night she returned to the cliffs, the same place where she'd nearly drowned. The air was sharp, filled with the crash of waves below. She held her old dog tag in her palm, tarnished, bent but whole. She knelt near the edge and set it down on the rock. For a moment she almost threw it into the sea, let the tide take it, but she stopped. Some things, she realized, aren't meant to be forgotten, only placed back where they belong. She stood, watching the surf break and roll. Somewhere beyond that horizon lay Kandahar, and the part of her that had died there. She spoke softly, to no one and everyone at once. You were wrong, Commander. The mission wasn't survival, it was return. The wind carried her words away, scattering them like ashes. Yeah. 2 days later, a letter arrived at the marina. No name, no return address. Inside, a single line written in Wolf's unmistakable hand. You were right. Command doesn't break you. It reveals what's already broken. Tessa folded it carefully, placed it in a drawer, and closed it, not out of forgiveness, out of finality. For the first time in years, she slept without dreams. Yeah. Months passed. The marina returned to rhythm. Boats in, boats out. Seasons rolled forward quietly, the way healing does when it stops needing attention. Caldwell wrote sometimes short letters, clean handwriting, always ending with gratitude she couldn't say aloud. Ortega called occasionally from deployments. Warren's hair went grayer, his humor didn't. And Tessa, she lived. Not like a survivor, not like a ghost, just a person. Sometimes at dusk, she'd stand on the dock and watch the horizon fade to gold. The wind would whisper against the water, soft as a prayer. And in that quiet, she'd hear her own heartbeat steady, alive, unashamed. Because in the end, survival wasn't the miracle. Coming back was. And sometimes, dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did the static sound so familiar? The radio crackled in the workshop, a faint pulse under the hum of the generator. Tessa barely noticed at first. It was fishing chatter, background noise, the kind of thing that fills silence when you're pretending you've made peace with it. But then it came again, 3 short bursts, a pause, then one long. The rhythm froze her mid-motion. That wasn't a call sign. That was a distress code. And she had written it. The wrench slipped from her hand and hit the concrete with a hollow ring. She turned toward the radio, eyes narrowing. The signal repeated, softer this time, buried beneath layers of interference. 3 short, 1 long. Her old unit's emergency pattern. 7 years buried with her in the desert until now. Warren came through the doorway, carrying coffee and the tired calm of someone who'd learned not to panic before she did. "You okay?" She gestured toward the radio. "Listen." He frowned, leaned in. To anyone else it was static. To her it was memory clawing its way through the frequency. "Could be bleed over from a ship beacon," he said. "Not on this frequency," she whispered. "This band's encrypted military. And that pattern," she stopped, forcing her breathing steady, "that's a distress ID. It's ours." Warren's eyes softened. Maybe it's old signal bounce. Afghanistan still littered with dead transmitters. "Maybe," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. All day the sound haunted her. It came and went like a heartbeat she couldn't locate. By nightfall she'd pulled the radio apart, running diagnostics she hadn't touched since the war. When she tuned the frequency manually, the interference cleared just enough to catch a word. "Phoenix." Her breath caught. Iron Phoenix, her call sign. The one Wolf had used as a joke once. The one that had made him collapse when she said it at the ceremony. The one no one alive should be using now. She cut power to the radio and sat in the dark. The silence that followed was worse, because ghosts don't call across continents unless someone's keeping them alive. The next morning the sky hung low and gray. She found herself outside Hartman's contact office before she'd even decided to go. The captain's assistant led her in without question. Hartman looked up from her desk, eyes sharp as ever. "You look like you haven't slept." "I didn't," Tessa said, a small recorder on the desk. "Picked this up last night." Hartman pressed play. Static filled the room, then faint bursts of sound, the unmistakable rhythm of the distress code. When the long tone came, Hartman's brow furrowed. And when the single word surfaced, Phoenix, she froze. "Where did you get this?" she asked. "Crescent Bay Marina frequency, 0400 hours. Same band we used in Kandahar." Hartman exhaled slowly. "That's not possible. All transmitters in that sector were decommissioned 5 years ago." "Unless someone turned one back on," Tessa said. Hartman turned off the recorder. "We've had chatter lately, small cells moving through the old AO, but no American frequencies, nothing this precise." She looked up. "You think Wolf sent it?" "I don't know," Tessa said, "but it's my code, my voice pattern, someone baiting us." Hartman leaned back, studying her. "You want me to pull the file?" "I want to know who's using my ghost." Yeah. 2 days later, Hartman called. "We found the source," she said. "Old relay station near the Kandahar Ridge line, recently reactivated. The transmission was manual." "Meaning someone was there?" "Yes, and they used your authentication string. We don't know how they got it." Tessa stared out at the gray water beyond her window. "When do we leave?" Hartman's pause was brief but telling. "You're not Navy anymore." "Neither is he." Hartman sighed. "Unofficially, there's a recon team assembling in Germany. I could get you attached as a consultant, strictly off record." "I'm in." Yeah. By the time she reached Ramstein, the air smelled like jet fuel and rain. Hartman's team was small, efficient, quiet professionals who didn't ask questions. Ortega was there too, to her surprise. His salute was half grin, half worry. "Didn't think I'd see you in camo again." "Neither did I," she said. They boarded a transport at dusk, engines roaring against a blood-orange sky. Inside, the hum of flight filled the silence. Ortega leaned over. "You think it's real?" "I think someone wants it to be," she said. Hartman joined them midway through the flight, file in hand. "The relay, in hostile terrain," she said. "Satellite eyes are limited. No known nade assets nearby. Whoever sent that signal, they're alone." "Or setting a trap," Ortega murmured. Hartman nodded. That too. Tessa closed her eyes. The vibration of the aircraft brought back the memory of another flight 7 years ago, the extraction she never made. She could almost feel the sand on her skin, the smell of burning fuel, the weight of abandonment. She opened her eyes again, steady. "Let's finish it this time," she said. Yeah. They touched down outside Kabul under low cloud. The convoy moved east, then south, the landscape flattening into the endless tan of memory. Every mile felt like time folding back on itself. At a rest stop near the ridge, Hartman briefed the team. "Our target is an abandoned NATO relay station. We'll enter at dawn. Expect minimal resistance but maximum uncertainty." Tessa checked her weapon, muscle memory, clean, efficient. Her hands didn't shake this time. Ortega watched her quietly. "You sure you're ready for this?" "No one's ready for ghosts," she said. "You just stop pretending they aren't real." Yeah. They reached the outpost before sunrise. The structure was half buried in sand, antenna bent like broken bones. The air was still. No movement, just the whisper of wind through metal. Hartman motioned forward. "Signal source originates inside. Monroe, you're on comms analysis. Ortega, cover her." Tessa knelt beside the console, brushing away dust. The control board was old but intact. Power lights still blinking, someone had been here recently. She connected her tablet, decoding the last transmission log. Her blood ran cold. The message wasn't random. It was a recording, her own voice, looped from a field transmission 7 years ago. "Iron Phoenix to command, do you copy? Request extraction, position compromised." She hit stop, staring at the screen. "It's playback. Someone retrieved my black box log." Hartman frowned. "Then who activated it?" Before Tessa could answer, Ortega's voice cut in. "Movement, east wall." They turned. A figure stepped into the doorway, desert cloak, rifle slung low. Sunlight caught his face just enough for her stomach to drop. "Wolf." He looked thinner, older, but the eyes were the same, unflinching, unreadable. "Stand down," Hartman ordered. "Commander, you're under arrest for—" He raised a hand. "Don't bother, I'm not here to run." His voice cracked slightly, roughened by sand and solitude. "I sent the signal." Tessa's pulse spiked. "Why?" "So you'd come," he said. Hartman's tone sharpened. "You're trespassing on active territory." "Territory no one remembers," he said quietly, "just like her." He stepped closer. No weapon raised. No threat, just gravity pulling every word heavier. "You wanted the truth, here it is. The real mission at Nightglass wasn't recon, it was cleanup. Intelligence asset extraction and termination. They told me to erase the outpost, not rescue it." Hartman stiffened. "That's classified." "It's immoral," he said. "And when Monroe went back for the asset, they told me to cut the line." Tessa's breath left her. "You're saying it was orders." "I'm saying it was cowardice disguised as orders." He looked at her, eyes wet with something that might have been regret. "I left because I couldn't live under that uniform anymore. You were never meant to die, Tessa. You were meant to disappear." Hartman's jaw clenched. "Why call now?" "Because they're erasing it again," he said. "All of it. Nightglass, the asset, even this relay. You think I'm the only one who lied. They're burying the evidence, and they'll bury you too if you don't leave." The wind rose, carrying sand through the broken windows. For a moment no one moved. Hartman raised her weapon. "You're still under charges, Commander." Wolf smiled faintly. "Then make it worth the paperwork." Tessa stepped forward. "Stop. Just tell me one thing. When you heard me calling that day, did you ever think I'd make it out?" He looked at her for a long time. "Every night since, I hoped you wouldn't, because surviving meant you'd have to live with what I did." The words hit harder than bullets. She lowered her weapon, shoulders heavy. "You don't get to decide what I live with." A burst of static tore through the air. The relay flickered to life again, lights flashing red. Ortega swore. "Incoming drone feed encrypted. Someone's triangulating the signal. Hartman cursed. They're wiping the site. Wolf grabbed the console, typing fast. Backup channel Northern Ridge. Go, I'll hold the connection. Tessa stepped toward him. You won't make it out. He smiled, the same bitter half-smile she remembered from years ago. That's the point. Don't you dare, she started, but the first explosion cut her off. The floor shook, dust raining from the ceiling. Hartman grabbed her arm. Monroe, move. She hesitated, one last look at Wolf, standing amid smoke and light, hands steady on the controls. For a second, she thought she saw peace on his face. Then she ran. They cleared the ridge just as the station went up, a bloom of fire and sand rising into the dawn. The shockwave knocked them down. When it cleared, nothing remained but silence. Hartman sat up, coughing. He stayed. Tessa stared at the smoke. He finished the mission. Which one? Hartman asked. Tessa didn't answer. She just watched the horizon, where the fire met the sky, and thought of all the ghosts finally finding rest. Back in Crescent Bay, the sea moved slow again. Months passed. Hartman's report vanished into classified silence. Ortega went back to duty. Warren still fixed boats and brewed coffee that tasted like forgiveness. Sometimes at night the radio would hiss, just static, but she'd wait a moment longer in case the tide ever decided to speak again. Once it did. A faint voice, almost lost to distance. Iron Phoenix, mission complete. She smiled through the ache in her chest. Copy that, she whispered. Because closure doesn't arrive with ceremony. It drifts in quietly, on broken frequencies and unfinished words. And sometimes, the people we lose aren't asking to be mourned. They're asking to be understood. Why did the quiet feel heavier than the explosions? The sea outside her window was motionless, a gray sheet under a pale sky. For the first time in years, Tessa couldn't tell if the stillness meant peace or absence. She'd come home weeks ago, but home felt different now, smaller somehow, like a stage after the actors have left. Crescent Bay had returned to its rhythm. Fishing boats rolled out at dawn, gulls circled above, the marina creaked with the pulse of tide and wood. The town had survived another winter, unchanged by the war stories hiding in plain sight. Only she carried its echo. The mirror by her bed caught her reflection, hair longer now, face lined deeper, eyes still sharp but quieter. Survival changes muscle, yes, but it changes silence more. She learned how to live without noise, and now it frightened her. She made tea, fed the stray cat that had started visiting her porch, and tried not to look at the radio. It hadn't made a sound since that final message. Mission complete. But sometimes she caught herself checking anyway. Habit maybe, or hope disguised as vigilance. Warren stopped by that afternoon, his presence as grounding as the scent of salt and engine oil that followed him everywhere. "You're doing that thing again," he said, setting a grocery bag on the counter. "What thing?" "Starring like the world owes you an explanation." She smirked faintly. "Doesn't it?" "Not one you'll like." He poured himself coffee. "Heard about the explosion. They said no survivors." She nodded. "There weren't supposed to be." He studied her. "And you?" "I'm alive again." "Does it feel different this time?" She thought about that. It feels quieter, like a story that finally stopped mid-sentence and stayed there. Warren sat, the chair creaking beneath his weight. Sometimes mid-sentence is the best ending you get. They shared silence for a long while, the kind that doesn't need mending. Spring came to Crescent Bay. The storm softened, and fishermen started humming again while they worked. Even the gulls sounded less angry. Tessa repaired boats by day and read by night, things she used to do to pass time, now done to claim it. Sometimes Ortega called from wherever the Navy sent him next. His messages were short, careful, still afloat. Caldwell's thriving. Hartman's been promoted. She always replied the same way. "Good, keep it that way." but every few nights she'd dream of Wolf. Not the officer, not the man who left her, but the one she saw at the end, standing calm amid fire, choosing truth over escape. In those dreams, he wasn't a commander, just a soldier trying to rewrite his last order. She'd wake before dawn, sit by the window and listen to the tide. It sounded almost like forgiveness.
Yeah.
One morning, as she was finishing repairs on the Marigold, she saw Vera Mitchell walking down the dock with her son. Aaron was taller now, broader in the shoulders, wearing a Navy recruitment shirt that hung loose on purpose. "Tessa," Vera called. "He wanted to tell you himself." Aaron grinned awkwardly. "I enlisted. Basic starts next month." Tessa blinked. "You sure about that?" He nodded. "I want to do something that matters." She felt a tug of worry, the kind born not from doubt but from recognition. "It will matter," she said softly. "Just promise me something." "What?" "When someone gives you an order that doesn't feel right, listen to that voice in your gut before theirs." He smiled, uncertain. "You sound like my mom." Vera laughed. "Good, he listens to you more." Tessa's lips curved. "Then he's already learning bad habits." As they walked away, she felt a strange warmth in her chest. Hope, maybe. The kind you only feel when someone else starts where you left off.
Yeah.
That evening, she walked the shoreline until the light began to fade. The cliffs of Blackstone were visible in the distance, their sharp outlines softened by mist. She stopped when the tide reached her boots and closed her eyes. "Are we done yet?" she whispered to the horizon. The wind moved against her face, not answering but not denying. Maybe that was enough.
Yeah.
Weeks later, a letter arrived. Plain envelope. No name, just a military return code she recognized: Hartman. Inside, declassified summary attached. Operation Nightglass officially recorded as compromised by command error. Civilian consultant Tessa L. Monroe acknowledged as survivor. Commendation pending. Beneath that one handwritten line, "Closure isn't silence, it's space to breathe." Tessa folded the paper and slipped it between the pages of her old field notebook. She didn't need the medal. The acknowledgement was enough proof that the ghosts were finally being named.
Yeah.
Summer brought tourists back to Crescent Bay. Kids ran barefoot along the dock. Families filled the diner. Fishermen complained about prices again, proof that normal life is its own kind of resilience. Tessa spent afternoons fixing boats and teaching Aaron small engine tricks before he left. She'd catch herself smiling when he cursed softly under his breath, the same way she used to. "You're better at this than I was at your age," she told him one day. He shrugged. "You had to learn faster." The words hit harder than he knew. She nodded. "Maybe so." Later that night, when the harbor lights blinked on, she found herself staring at the water again. Reflection in the tide, the version of herself who'd once needed to fight just to exist. That version had faded now, replaced by something simpler. She realized she no longer flinched at thunder or silence.
Yeah.
Autumn crept in quietly. Leaves rusted, mornings cooled, and the smell of smoke returned to the air. Tessa woke early one morning to find a single envelope on her doorstep. No name, no stamp, just an old Navy seal embossed faintly on the paper. Inside was a photograph, grainy, time-worn. Wolf, younger, smiling beside his team. On the back, in the same handwriting as the letter months ago, "For the record, I never stopped seeing you." No signature, just that. She stood there for a long time, the wind shifting between her fingers and the edges of the photo curling inward. Then she placed it in the drawer beside his last note, two ghosts sharing the same silence.
Yeah.
The marina prepared for winter. Boats were pulled onto dry dock, ropes tightened, windows sealed. Warren joked about retiring again but never did. "Someone got to keep you from turning into a hermit," he said. "Too late," she replied. "You think peace means hiding. It doesn't. It means showing up without armor." She smiled. "You always have a quote ready." I spent half my life learning them, he said. Might as well use them before the tide takes me. They both laughed, not loud, just enough to remind themselves they still could.
The
That night she went walking again. The moon was full, the air sharp. She reached the same spot where she'd once thrown her dog tag onto the rocks, only to find it still there, half buried in salt and sand. She picked it up, turned it over in her palm. The metal had tarnished, but the engraving was still clear. Monroe, Tessa L. She traced the letters with her thumb, then looked up at the horizon. She thought of Wolfe, of Hartman, of Caldwell and Ortega, of the young girl she'd been, certain that dignity came from obedience. She thought of the woman standing here now, certain it came from endurance. She whispered to the waves, "We did it, we came back." The wind carried it out to sea. Maybe that was answer enough. Later, back in her apartment, she turned on the radio again, not expecting anything, just needing to hear life hum through wires. Static filled the room, low and steady. Then a single sound cut through, a faint, rhythmic pulse. Not distress this time, just steady, 3 long, 3 short, 3 long, the universal code for SOS reversed. A sign of arrival. She smiled softly, tears threatening but never falling. "I hear you," she whispered. She sat in the dark, listening as the signal faded into the night, until there was nothing left but the sound of her own breathing. And for the first time in a decade, it didn't sound like survival. It sounded like living. Months later, when Aaron graduated basic, he sent her a single photo, standing straight, clean uniform, eyes full of belief. On the back, his handwriting read, "For every ghost who taught me to keep walking." She pinned it beside the window, where sunlight caught it every morning. Sometimes she'd talk to it like she used to talk to the sea. "You'll make it through," she'd murmur. "Just remember to come back." Time kept moving, as it always does. The war faded from the headlines, then from the whispers, then from memory. But some stories aren't meant to be forgotten. They're meant to be lived differently. Tessa Monroe, Iron Phoenix, learned that resurrection isn't about being remembered. It's about choosing what to do with the time you weren't supposed to have. Every morning she watched the tide roll in. Every night she watched it leave. The rhythm never changed, but she had. And in that endless motion, she found something she'd once thought lost forever. Not closure, not forgiveness, just peace that didn't need permission. Because sometimes survival is only the beginning. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do after war is stay. Why did the young ones always whisper her name like it belonged to a myth? Years had passed. The wars changed names, the uniforms changed patterns, but stories, they survived. Some in history books, some in barracks talk, and a few in quiet warnings passed from veteran to recruit. In the Navy's new coastal training base near Crescent Bay, there was one such story. About a woman mechanic who never wore her medals, who spoke little but fixed everything, engines, radios, people. They said she'd once been a SEAL. They said she'd died twice. They said she'd come back. Most called it rumor. But rumors, when they stay long enough, become faith. On a gray morning thick with mist, Lieutenant Javier Ortega stood before a classroom of fresh recruits. His hair was more silver now, his eyes sharper. Time had not softened him, only focused him. "Listen up," he said. "Today's about field protocol. But first, I want to tell you about someone who taught me what it means to walk away from orders and toward conscience." He paused, scanning the room. Her name was Tessa Monroe, Iron Phoenix. The room quieted instantly. The younger ones leaned forward, notebooks forgotten. She was a legend before the Navy ever admitted she existed. A pilot, diver, operator, brilliant and stubborn as hell. And she didn't survive because she was the best. She survived because she refused to die the wrong way. A recruit raised her hand, hesitating. "Sir, did you know her?" Ortega smiled faintly. She saved my life more than once, sometimes by speaking, sometimes by staying silent. He walked to the window, looking out toward the sea. There's a story, a true one, about the day she came back from the dead. The system called her missing in action. The truth was simpler. The system gave up, and she didn't. He turned back to the room. That's your lesson today. Orders end. Duty doesn't. You serve the uniform, yes, but never let it erase your humanity. He let the words hang before finishing quietly. Because if you forget what you're fighting for, you'll end up like those who stopped listening to their own conscience.
The
That evening, Ortega walked the docks, the same ones she used to pace when the sea was her only witness. The workshop still stood, repainted, rebuilt, but carrying her shape in every corner. Warren had passed 2 winters ago. His son ran the marina now, still leaving coffee mugs out by the bench like old rituals waiting for their owner. And though Tessa Monroe was gone, truly gone this time, her presence hadn't left. Ortega stopped by the small memorial near the rocks. A plaque set into the stone read simply, Tessa L. Monroe, Iron Phoenix. She didn't come home to be honored. She came home to be seen. Below it, someone had left her dog tag, the same one she once found half buried in salt. He knelt, brushing the sand away. You were right, he murmured. Survival's not the end. The tide rolled in, soft and steady. The wind carried gull cries over the cliffs. He could almost hear her voice, calm, teasing, alive. You still overthink everything, Lieutenant. He smiled, still trying to catch up to you, Commander. Farther up the coast, in a military archive Hartman once oversaw, a file sat unsealed. Operation Nightglass Classified Debrief. The pages inside were worn, annotated in the margins. Her handwriting. Hartman had insisted it remain accessible to recruits. Some truths, she'd said, need witnesses, not secrets. In her final memo, Hartman had written, she never asked for a medal, only a chance to make her silence mean something. The Navy never gave her the commendation. She wouldn't have accepted it anyway. But her story, whispered, retold, reshaped, began to change the way young soldiers thought about obedience. And that was its own kind of medal. Years later, a small museum opened on the pier. Nothing grand, just a modest space of photographs and letters. The curator, Vera's son Aaron, now middle-aged and soft-spoken, stood behind the counter most days, explaining artifacts to curious tourists. He'd served 15 years before coming home to care for his mother. He still wore his service ring, but his voice carried none of the weight most veterans carried. One afternoon, a young woman in uniform visited. She paused before a faded photograph. A woman standing by a boat, sunlight on her face, half-smile hidden behind shadow. Who was she? The young soldier asked. Aaron smiled. A mechanic, a teacher, a ghost who forgot how to stay dead. The woman laughed softly. Sounds like a story. He nodded. It is. One that doesn't end in glory, just in peace, which is rarer. She studied the photograph. What was she like? Aaron's eyes softened. Still, strong, the kind of person who could stare down chaos and make it blink first. The soldier smiled. Wish I'd met her. You have, he said quietly. If you've ever chosen what's right instead of what's easy, you've met her. That night the waves pressed gently against the docks. The world was smaller now, or maybe just quieter, but the echoes still lingered. Voices in the training halls, names whispered in wind, stories traded between generations. Caldwell, now a commander herself, sometimes came to visit the old marina. She'd walk the pier barefoot like Tessa used to, carrying her boots in one hand. Each time she came, she'd leave something behind, a patch, a letter, a shell from whatever foreign coast she'd been deployed to. One night, standing at the edge of the dock, she whispered into the dark water, I kept going. The tide answered in the only way it knew, by rising quietly to meet her boots. Elsewhere, in a classroom at Annapolis, Hartman's old lesson notes had become part of a leadership module. Printed at the top of one page, underlined in ink, were Tessa's own words, written years ago in a private notebook, now shared with cadets. Leadership isn't control, it's conscience in motion. And sometimes, the strongest command is the one that says stop. The cadets read it, nodded, and moved on, not realizing how much it cost the writer to earn those lines. But history doesn't need gratitude, just memory.
The
At dusk, the sea off Crescent Bay turned molten gold. From the cliffs, you could see the whole arc of the horizon, endless, patient, unknowable. Some said that when the tide hit just right, you could hear a faint echo from beneath the waves, a burst of static, then silence. Old sailors claimed it was the sea remembering her signal. Iron Phoenix. Whether it was myth or memory didn't matter. Some stories aren't meant to be proven, they're meant to be felt.
the
In the end, her story wasn't about revenge or redemption or war. It was about return, about what happens when you come back to the world that forgot you and choose to live in it anyway. The system that erased her name ended up rebuilding itself around it, not because she fought to belong, but because she proved belonging doesn't require permission. Her legacy lived not in records or plaques, but in pauses, the breath a young soldier takes before following a questionable order, the silence a commander holds before signing a name they'll have to live with. That's how she won, quietly.
the
At the very edge of the pier, beneath a brass plaque weathered by salt, someone once carved a single line, no one knows who. The letters have faded, but when the sun hits them just right, you can still read them. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And when the sea rises at sunset, it carries those words into the horizon again and again, without end, as if even the tide refuses to forget.